of the AFP. Oh, we're being recorded. I'm a member of the AFPGV Education Committee. So welcome to our first deep dive in over 2 years. So deep dives are an opportunity to learn and discuss a particular topic in a smaller, friendly environment. So feel free to drop a question into the chat and I'll be monitoring. And if by chance you have an anonymous question, you can send it just to me. But before we really get started, I have a couple of announcements. The Small Shops Networking Group is meeting next Wednesday, March 2nd at noon. The group meets monthly on the first Wednesday from noon to 1. And it's open to AFP members and non-members. And there's no fee for that. The next full AFP program is also Wednesday, March 2nd from 3:30 to 4:30. And it's a hybrid at Coordinated Care Services on J Street. And it's also online. The topic is the state of giving in 2022, what the economy, investment markets, and legislative environment says about donors' ability to give. And that's being presented by one of AFP's sponsors, Nick Centineo from Manning and Napier Advisors. So info about those are on the chapter website, afpgv.org. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Carol Love and Maggie Symington, who will share a bit about engaging the board in fundraising, since we all know fundraising is not just the development director's responsibility, but it's also the board's responsibility. And these two know a lot about boards and fundraising. Carol is a longtime veteran in nonprofit management, and she knows both sides of the desk, having been a CEO for many years, as well as serving on boards and chairing 3 boards. And Maggie is the Jiva Theater board chair. She too has served on several nonprofit boards. Along with Jiva, she's been on the boards of Cornhole Navigation, Garth Fagan Dance, and Rochester City Ballet. So Carol, Maggie, you both get it, and I'm gonna let you take it away.
Great, Melinda. Thank you so much for the nice introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all, and it's wonderful to be here. I was pleased to be asked to do this, and even more pleased that if this was to be a deep dive about board engagement, that I could get a real live, wonderful board chair from Jiva Theater Center, Maggie Symington, to be my partner in doing this. We had a really great time preparing for today. We had more than one discussion and did kind of our own deep dive. And I have to say, I learned some things, not just about Maggie, but about what Maggie thinks. And then I learned some things as I did some self-reflection about my experience in fundraising and where things were useful and what might not have been so useful. So we're going to share some of those ideas today. And we not only talked about content, but we talked about the kind of tone and atmosphere we wanted, which sounds from your description, Melinda, about you said that before COVID, some of these deep dives took place in bars. So we want you to pretend you have a nice drink in your hand and are relaxing at the end of a long day as we talk about board engagement. So Maggie?
Thanks, Carol and Melinda. Yes, thank you very much for inviting us. If I had known that, I wouldn't have postponed my drinking until after this. I would be starting now. So, when we were originally planning this, I think we all had hopes that we would be back in person live, but that isn't happening. We're here on Zoom. So Carol and I are going to try to keep this kind of informal. It's going to be a discussion. As Melinda said, if you have some questions, pop them into chat. She's going to monitor them because I can't do 2 things at once. But just so you know, just going into this, there's no one right answer to any of this fundraising business, and there aren't any magic bullets. So if that's what you came for, I apologize in advance.
Right, if that's what you came for, you can go to the bar now. Okay, well, one of the things that we're going to do is toss some things back and forth as questions. And we're going to start out with my posing a question to Maggie, and then she may turn the tables on me and ask me the same thing. But the first question is, Maggie, tell us a little bit about your fundraising journey. We all hear a lot about board members are anxious and stressed about it. And so what's your journey been like? Have you had some turning points and learnings? And can you share some of that with us?
So absolutely. And I will start out saying, I hate asking for money. That's like the worst thing in the world to me. And one of the things I feared when I first joined boards was having to do that, having to ask strangers for money. And it turned out that's not what I had to do. I didn't have to ask strangers for money. I had to give people, mostly people I know, opportunities to give to the organization, to invest in the organization. One of the reasons, my personal fear, and this probably is shared by other people too, one of my biggest fears was of failing. So I was afraid that if I didn't get the money from a certain person, that's, I had failed personally, that somebody else better at doing this would have succeeded. It took, so the aha moment for me there was thinking about it in reverse, thinking about it as a donor, because I'm a donor to a lot of organizations. And I thought, well, wait a second. When the development people or trustees ask me for money and I don't give, I don't think it's because they did a bad job asking. It's just because there was a mismatch in what their organization does, their mission, their values, whatever, and what I'm interested in at the moment. So that was the other sort of aha thing for me, was that just because somebody says no, it's not no forever, it's no for now, or it's no to that particular thing. And as things change, you might get to yes. So, that it took a while, but I was able to finally do it, I think, to depersonalize that and get rid of that fear. So that was, kind of my own aha moment. And also, going from staying on a board long enough to have my own personal story that I could tell, instead of being able to just say, okay, our budget is this, we do this, but to have had my experience in the organization, and that sharing that experience is a lot more meaningful than just giving people the statistics that they can look up on the website. So Carol, how about you?
Well, if I were in thinking about my journey in fundraising, something pops right out to me. And that is about probably 35 years ago. I was relatively new on the board of YWCA. And the very experienced, skilled, lovely development director said to me, well, I'd like to help you along a little bit in the whole perspective on fundraising. So a campaign was underway, and she asked me to be her partner in asking for a gift. And she made clear that I was going to be the one that was going to ask for the gift. Her part of the partnership was to talk about some of the things that this campaign would make possible. And the gift, though it was only $2,500 that I was to ask for, seemed really big to me, having never asked for a gift before. She schooled me on how to ask, namely, would you consider a gift of $2,500? I was sweating bullets, despite the fact that it wasn't $100,000. And I can still see the office where we were sitting. I can feel the lump in my throat as I prepared to say, and would you consider, we'd love it if you'd consider a gift of $2,500. And lo and behold, they said yes. Now, I don't know, other than the fact that I had words to make that ask, how much better I felt and prepared to do it in the future. But I did feel better about doing it in the future because I had done it. I was successful. I had feared, for some of the same reasons Maggie described, that they might say no. And so I have given a lot of thought to why was I so frightened? And I think as I reflect on it, it's because I didn't understand the whole process. I didn't understand some of what the development director knew about the cultivation that had gone on, about the interests of the person, of the couple. It was a couple. And what they'd be likely to say yes to, as the focus became on the relationship and their interests. An aha for me was, it's not about me. It's about fulfilling the donor's wishes and matching with interests. So I benefited a lot from that. And I have used those words, would you consider a gift of, many times since. But even thinking about the fact that I have raised, as the CEO of the YWCA and the CEO of Planned Parenthood, quite a bit of money since then, that question of what makes this such a stressful experience for so many board members occurred to me. And I thought about that. What I really thought about was, the idea of philanthropy or making the world a better place in your community or even outside of the United States is something that I should be familiar with, because I was raised in a household where we tithed. 10% of what came into our house in income went out to either the church or to charitable causes. And I still do that today. That's a habit that I have. But it wasn't just that. I mean, I did take my money in my envelope to church every Sunday from my allowance. But I also had my black and orange box for UNICEF that I took around with me as I collected candy bars and candy corn on Halloween. And that went to help children around the world. And then when I got to my first job in Rochester, which was at the YWCA, I learned that I was expected to pledge 1% of my salary. I expected, and that was not a soft expectation, that was real. And I did that, and I pledged to United Way, and I kind of liked the feeling that I was supporting the community. And I became and am a lifelong donor then to the United Way. So, here I am, and there are loads of other people just like me who are wanting to do this and looking for ways that will be really meaningful. And that's the job that we all have, to help them understand how what they want to accomplish, not just end hunger, but feed 10 people. It's easy to do it. You can't go out in the street and do it easily, but you can do it through, or whatever it is that you make happen that's good in the world. And that's the central point. Being a little anxious about today's occasion, I took a webinar last week, and I found through that some things that are also very encouraging and things that you can share with your donors. In 2019, which was the year before the pandemic, there was this incredible amount of money given in the United States to charitable causes, $450 billion. And 69% of that came from individual donors and 41 billion in bequests. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of people giving. In fact, as people thought, oh, it's going to be chaos, not-for-profits are going to be going under, and some have. But for many nonprofits, the pandemic year was more successful in fundraising than it was the year before. And overall in the United States, according to the data on this webinar, $471 billion was raised for charitable causes. And here's what really impressed me. 80% of those who gave had household incomes under $60,000. So it was not all wealthy people who were giving this money, this $471 billion. In fact, it was 85% of people making less than 60. And each one of those people gave to between 5 to 10 charities. So I bring that up to point out there are lots of people who are in the habit of giving. They may not even think of it as charitable contribution, but they are giving. They have big hearts. They are showing that with these statistics. And so some of the work is already done for us. We just have to ask, we have to outreach so we know what people are interested in, and it's all centered in the relationship. So my final point relative to my fundraising journey is that I have learned about its relationship building. It's not just getting the money and running. Understanding the process and getting some help with it, which we'll talk about as we move on, is the name of the game. So.
Now, Carol, I have a question for you. So the audience, today's audience, it's a mixture of development people and some board members.
Yep.
So you're saying that the development person should ask some board members to make these calls like you made on your first call?
I'm saying that I would start by saying it's individual to every organization, fund development committee, board. I think the engagement of, I'll jump to something I was going to say later, and that is that I think the kind of conversations and thinking that Maggie and I did to prepare for this is a conversation that perhaps development committees and maybe whole boards ought to have. What makes fundraising stressful? I'm not sure everybody should go through the kind of experience that I had, because I think there was something perhaps missing in that experience, in that I didn't understand the full process. It's almost to me like fundraising has shifted to more of a relationship base than a transactional base. And I think you have to ask, I would recommend asking the whole board, what is it that makes fundraising difficult? And what is it that makes fundraising easier? What has helped you? What have your experiences been? So that the Fund Development Committee can consider what sorts of education should we be doing with the board? And it's already come up, Maggie mentioned it, storytelling, for example, but you have to find the mechanism to create people with the opportunity to tell the stories. So we're going to talk about how do you find the people to put on your board, how do you equip them to do the ask, and what's your fundraising plan strategically. Maggie?
And yeah, if I can I'd just like to add that since, we're talking about a deep dive, I would highly recommend that nobody be pushed into the deep end before they're ready. Help people swim, take them baby steps, gradually if they're not accustomed to this. If somebody had done to me what Carol described, I would have run away screaming and never joined another board. So I think one of the things that the organization needs to do is really assess honestly the skills of each of the trustees. Some people are going to be good at this, some people aren't, some people already are, some people are open, as I think I was, to learning and watching other people. I had some role models in that, and that is always helpful, is seeing somebody do it well, whatever it is, but particularly in fundraising, seeing somebody do it well, and then I can copy that the next time. So that would be so my little addition to that.
Yeah, I would say that the single most important thing in my ability to raise money has been a partnership that I had, a mentorship. I don't think she really even viewed herself as a mentor, and she probably still is, in terms of how to ask for money and do it with great grace and connection with the potential donor. And this was a person who was a former board chair at Planned Parenthood, who recently called me to ask me for a donation for another organization, which was a case where something that I also makes me a little stressed is it wasn't the right time for me to make that donation, and I needed to say no to her. Received with such grace and understanding, an interest in talking to me about the particular project that it was to fund, and a promise to get some answers to some questions I had and bring them back to me. But this person worked with me on a $5 million campaign, the majority of which we hope would be for education, endowment. And people said, nah, nobody buys endowment. You're not going to be able to do it. Not true. 4 million of it about was for endowment, because we had a very good case statement tailored to what we had heard as we listened to our donors. And we exceeded the goal that had been set, and the majority of it was for endowment. But watching her, it was our dog and pony show. She did the asks because she is just so very good at it, because she is so real and sincere and trustworthy.
Right. And I want to add too that there are different ways to engage trustees in fundraising. I mean, there's the obvious, like, go ask somebody for money, but there's also providing introductions. There's also, if your organization has some sort of fundraising event, bringing people to the event and letting the event speak for the ask. And I know as a donor myself, I've had lots of friends invite me to their tables at their events. The first one, I'll say the first one we attended when we moved here was Bavona. And I'm like, what's a Bavona? I don't even, what's that? And we went to the event, and our hands went up pretty early in the paddle call, because we were so moved by discovering what a Bavona is and who she is, but what the organization does. And so our table host didn't even have to ask me for money. All he had to do was invite me to that table and let the organization speak for itself. So that's also a way that trustees can get involved if you have some sort of events, or if you have, the ability to invite people to do a walkthrough of your organization, or see the organization in action. So you don't have to have every trustee be able to say, would you consider doing this?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the point that has been made several times is giving people something to work with. For me, there are two things that are really important. One is the mentorship and watching somebody do it right. And two is giving people something to talk about, giving them something to work with. And you mentioned a couple of ways. Sometimes you don't even have to talk about it. You can take them to the agency or organization, or you can take them to an event where they can see it. I think of teen empowerment, and how when you go to teen empowerment's luncheon, the kids are there and they're talking about what difference it has made in their life. And people who are bringing you to the lunch don't have to say a thing, but generally they do, because they are so committed. And I have a particular bias against what I often hear when I go to a board and they're talking about fundraising. Well, what we really need is an elevator speech. I am not a fan of elevator speeches. Elevator speeches are canned. It's talking about mission and vision in a very formal way, like something you'd find at the top of the strategic plan. It's not that it doesn't need to be talked about. It does, but it needs to be talked about you and the impact that it makes in the community. And it's the organization's obligation to provide you the information and the stuff that you can weave into the statements that you can make. So you need stories you can tell. Sometimes they come to you, but sometimes they have to be in a formal way introduced to you, even at board meetings. It's when a staff comes in and talks, when it's possible for a client to come in and talk. And at least one or two of you may have heard me tell my favorite Jiva story. But this is a story about a program that pre-pandemic Jiva had, where an entire school, or a school drama department, or those who were interested in being involved at the school, meaning the kids, actually produced a play that was on stage at Jiva. They worked with the actors, they worked with costumes, they worked with scenery, and they learned all about putting on a theatrical production in a very professional way. And I was in the audience at Jiva when they presented their play with the actors and those they'd worked with, watching them. And it was the play Almost Maine. And when the play opens, there's a young man sitting with a young woman on a bench in a snowy environment. And there's a vignette, and I thought, wow, that is really well done. I wonder if those kids really have a lot of experience before they do this. Well, sometime later, I found out that the young man on the bench had never acted before, and had gotten involved in this production. And this was coming from the director of education telling us this story at a board meeting. And he told us that the night of the day of the dress rehearsal, this young man panicked and he said, I can't do this, I can't go on. And Skip, the director, said, okay, lie down right here. let's just work on this for a minute, did breathing exercise, got him in shape to actually go on stage. That production that I saw where I thought, oh, he's got to have had acting experience. And so that's a great story, isn't it? But that's not it. There's more. The rest of the story is that a year later, this young man walks into Skip's office at Jiva, having just come home from Afghanistan, where he was deployed. And he was standing at a checkpoint as headlights came to him, the first experience of this kind he'd had, and he started to hyperventilate again. And he remembered the breathing exercises and he did them, and he was in Skip's office to thank him. Now, that's a story. That's only one of many stories, not just at Jiva, but at lots of people's places of volunteering and where they work in the not-for-profit world that are really making differences in people's lives, that are stories that kind of take your breath away and that warm people's hearts. And those are the stories you need because they're the interpretation of the mission and the vision. So in order to make that happen, board members need to be in the environment, seeing things happen, helping make things happen. They need to hear from clients. They need to hear from staff members. And these are the kinds of things that can happen at board meetings. And I'd also like to make a point about if you're bringing board members and prospects into an organization, you want to make sure that the culture of philanthropy, in other words, the belief that what we do here is important, helping the world, and we have concrete proof of it, and we have an attitude of gratitude for the people who help us make that happen. So if you bring somebody in and you see a program in action and you have a chance to talk with the person who's facilitating or whatever they're doing, they not only can tell you about it, but they can tell you how grateful they are for people like you who support it. So those are just some of the things that people can do within an organization, within a board, that make concrete contributions to their ability to interpret and encourage people to give to that organization in volunteer time or money.
So that's a good segue into the next item on our agenda, which is, what do you look for when considering what's needed to find and grow organizational ambassadors? What do we look for in board members?
Well, I'd like everybody to be thinking about this because you know one when you see them. I'm sure you do. You know the type of person you're looking to go out there and represent your organization and who's willing to take on that relationship building. But I'm just going to say a word or two about one of my favorite subjects, which is the role of a nominating or board development committee. And that is that's the gateway to helping to fulfill the organization's mission, and finding the right people to do that, not just in general, but related to your strategic plan. This is where we are. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. So it may be the difference between we're going to have a major gifts campaign, or we're going to do a series of small events, carefully considering, is it providing return on investment? I have to add that. Are we going to have a capital campaign in our future? What are we looking for to provide the ambassadors that not only open the doors to fundraising, but other partnerships that are important to our progress? So that's where you start with that matrix that says, we've got this, this is going off, this is what we need to be bringing in. But you talk about the characteristics you're looking for, and hopefully set the whole board and your staff and others looking for people with those qualifications, including the types of folks that are going to be able to help. And the other expression that I like is orientation begins at the time of recruitment. You don't want people getting on the board and finding out this is what we're looking for and expecting from you in your own contribution. There needs to be a policy for that, and what kind of fundraising you will be engaged with, and what the options are. We expect everyone to do it, but we have all these options, as Maggie was saying. We also have a contract, so you can be explicit about what you will do. And we have a part to that where we say, and this is what we will do for you as the organization. So everybody would love to have experienced fundraisers. There are, we like somebody who knows exactly how to do it and who has a huge network and can go out and bring in all this money. Not too many board development committees are able to produce in hordes those folks, but I think it's really important not to underestimate the power and the potential of inexperienced people. The people, they're people with who make friends easily, who are very interested in other people, who do have an affinity for your mission. And that's where your questions ought to be going in terms of, why are you interested in becoming part of this board and this organization? But also, what would you need from us? And have you had any experience with this? And what has been your experience? So that it's not just what they say, it's how they say it. And that old saying, and make friends and influence people. So I guess I'd love to hear from you. Maybe put it in the chat. What do you look for? What do you think you need on your board and eventually your fund development committee to activate the whole board to be successful in friend and fundraising?
And while you're doing that, I would just like to add that, I think one of the qualities that we ought to look more for in trustees when we're recruiting them is the ability to listen, the ability to, it's not just about, having your story and telling the organization's story, but especially in fundraising, it's about listening to what that person is interested in and seeing if there's a match with what your organization provides. And so, really being able to listen and digest and not just talk. And I'm not sure that we really think about that much in our recruiting of trustees.
Yeah, and one of the activities at JIVA that I really enjoy participating in is making thank you calls. And and listening is so important there, because there are lots of clues as to what our donors are interested in and what's been really meaningful to them, and capturing that, providing that as part of what we know about a donor and what might be attractive to them and what might make them even happier donors is really significant.
Right. And then I know that I've been on a number of boards, some of which had a give or get, some of them did not. Some of them were successful in their give and gets, and some of them were not. But I also think it's important not just that the people that we recruit be able to give whatever that amount of money is that they're required to give, but they actually be inspired to give. The people that we have on our boards should want to support our organizations. It seems to me it's very difficult to convince other people to give to your organization if you don't actually give yourself. It doesn't have to be, a huge amount of money. I was on one board where it was just, you had to make a $10 contribution, or another board was you had to make something that was meaningful to you. But it has to be something more than zero. So reading the chat.
Yeah, looking to see.
Yeah, so a couple things have come in. So Marie Stefan said she appreciates the comments about being more intentional with regards to fundraising, providing training and supporting board members where they're at and assisting them in developing skills in the areas they are comfortable. So can you suggest any training? So you might have board members who, you talked about recruiting new board members, but you might have had some that have been on the board for a while. Are there any training opportunities that you can think of or suggestions?
So I want to suggest two things. One of which I did, which I went to a fear of fundraising seminar at one of the local colleges. I can't remember which one now. And one of the things that they talked about doing, and we may have done it as an exercise, and they suggested that organizations do this, and I've never seen this done in any of the organizations I've been on the board of, is doing some role playing. That's, having the development person sit down with a trustee and walk through a scenario, do a pretend situation, and then talk about how that went. I have never experienced that, and I do think it would be a good thing to do.
Great idea.
Jiva did do something similar a few years ago, which was have board members do a one-on-one with someone at their table. And then they mixed it up by having board members divide into two groups and two lines. So you walked across the room, and to the person standing on the other side of the room in that spot, tell your story. And as, for example, the story that I just told. And it gave you practice for thinking about what stories do I have to tell. It gave you the experience of telling it to someone, and it gave you the benefit of hearing other people's stories, which you can easily pirate. So I think I'm looking at one in the chat here. I'd love for our board members to be willing to deeply learn our story and help us find innovative ways to tell the story to a wider audience. Is that from Joel?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joel, what do you think keeps, might be a barrier to people being willing to deeply learn the story? Is it time? Is it lack of source material?
I think maybe it's the understanding of what the board's role is. It's a little bit divergent from what you and Maggie are talking about. They spend a lot of time going over the budgets and making sure that our financial situation is stable. They spend a lot of time on governance issues and making sure that we're following all the nonprofit laws, and not a lot of time going out in the community and telling stories, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I highly recommend for all boards is that a board work plan be put together for the beginning of whatever you clock your year by, whether it's the program year or the fiscal year or whatever, that how boards spend their time is a really critical part of governance. All of those things you mentioned are important. It's important to have board members every now and then refresh their memories about these are our jobs. And maybe this could be sent out to participants. I can recommend a 5-minute video which talks about every aspect of the board's responsibilities. And a good time to do that is at the beginning of the year and say, for this period of time, here's what we have to get done. And one of them is to spend time in fundraising training, or maybe you can find something a little more appealing to call it relative to storytelling time or something. But it gives the board a sense of, we've got to get these things done. This is how we're going to spend our time in board meetings. And I'm a great advocate for use a consent agenda, do your committee reports in writing. Don't talk about things that are in the past, talk about the future and what we need to get done for the future. So board work plans are a great way to do that. Free up that time, put it on the calendar, and make sure it gets done. And it's just as important that you do these ambassador functions as it is. I'm not saying in lieu of doing the financials. I'm saying you've got to find a way to do both.
And I just want to add, I think it's important, and this can take some evolution, but it's important for trustees to hold each other accountable, for there to be some peer pressure. It shouldn't always be the management or the development staff sitting and having conversations with the trustees. There needs to be a cohort of trustees that get this and help with the peer pressure. And that will bring, I think, a lot more success than the development person sitting down annually with each trustee and saying, what are you going to do for us this year?
Yeah, and that goes back again to the board development or nominating committee, because when you're looking for who should be on the board, Howard Berman, who is the major founder of the Center for Community Engagement at Fisher, a wonderful resource for you on all topics governance, has talked about board composition of you need a third of the people who understand governance, so they're keeping the right things on the agenda and able to comment among their peers about how we're spending our time, for example. A third of the people need to be skilled or experienced with perspectives on the business that your organization is in. And a third of the people need to be people with, he calls it luster, I call it glitter, who are known in the community, have the connections, and can help move people, not just internally, but externally into the community with who get attention and lend credibility. So that idea of holding each other accountable and making sure that all of the things that are supposed to be receiving attention are getting them. Any committee is responsible for advocating for their responsibility within the full board, not just what happens in the committee.
Yeah. So another question's come into the chat from Leslie Zornow, who's on the board of Girls on the Run, which is a smaller nonprofit. I don't even know if they have any paid staff, Leslie, do they?
We have 3 paid staff,
Oh,
actually
okay.
2.5,
Oh.
but
Oh, they've grown, because I remember when it was all volunteer. Yeah.
yeah, no, it is definitely a small grassroots. So we have a few paid staff members now.
All
Small
right,
but
so-
mighty.
Yeah, so her question is a small group of board members who volunteer for everything and do most of the fundraising along with the executive director. And Leslie senses that the rest of the board sits back because they assume the small group of doers will always step up.
So, this gets to that balance of time, treasure, and talent, or I may have done it in the wrong order, time, talent, and treasure. Not everybody on the board has equal time to give or equal treasure to give. And so there has to be some acknowledgement of that. But I wonder if in your case, is it always the volunteers who are stepping up immediately because that's what they love to do, or are they stepping up because nobody else is stepping up? And not, so are they giving space to other people, or, could they be encouraged to help others volunteer with them?
I think that's a very good point, Maggie. I think, and I'll put myself in the doer category that, we do tend to be the hand raisers, the participants, maybe just by nature. So I think that's a great point, that maybe we need to either bring some of those people along with us or make some space for them to volunteer before we do.
Yeah, and again, it may be something that in terms of looking at how you're resourced, you want to analyze that and look at when you are in your board renewal cycle, look at, are there people who are not carrying their weight and fulfilling their commitments, and maybe this isn't the right time for them to be on the board, and maybe space literally needs to be made for the board development committee to look at, we need to recruit more people who are interested in fulfilling those responsibilities, or who could alleviate that situation some. And Leslie, you'll be delighted to hear that my granddaughter in Brooklyn has been introduced to Girls on the Run.
Oh, I'm so glad. I hope she is having a great experience.
Just looking in the chat here for.
I don't think so. Somebody wrote in that they have done role playing at the board level.
So I'd be curious to know how that went. How did trustees respond to that? Who put that in the chat?
I don't know if I don't know if the person wants to say.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I don't mind saying. I just said,
Okay.
Melinda is passing notes in class. It was a long time ago and it was at a board. So I left that organization regretfully, but to move on to something else, gosh, in 2007, just to give you an idea. So I think we're all safe. But some of the board members reacted very well. Some got very fluffy and upset. But it was a great exercise because it gave folks that hadn't the experience of doing a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 solicitation over coffee or lunch, the opportunity to feel it, which was kind of cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, I think making time for this sort of thing, preparing people so that they aren't handling it cold, but there's been some training on how to handle these things. But again, I'm a great advocate of creating time, and a board retreat is a great experience. It's good all the way around. It's good for board members getting to know each other on a casual basis, which can't help but really grease the wheels for working relationships. And it gives enough time that you can be sure everyone has the opportunity for the experience. So carving out an hour of a 4-hour retreat is a great way to go.
So are there any other, this is an informal discussion. We've already kind of segued from how do you get people on the bus to what do you give them? We've already talked about now that some of the tools that you give them. Are there any other tools, Carol, that you think are important to give trustees?
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of covering them. I think that the whole idea of mentorship, and I think having people talk at a board meeting about, I had an experience and here this is what it was like, maybe get feedback about it, maybe make recommendations based on your experience, have a fundraising 5 minutes at every board meeting. I think we also wanted to talk a bit about how do we make donors feel special, and that's part of a board member's job. How do you make your donors feel special, folks?
So while people are popping that into the chat, I'll reiterate something that Jiva does is we have a tradition of trustees making thank you calls to donors, and that sends a different message than people getting calls from the development staff or the tax letter that they get from the organization that's signed by the CEO. So I'll relate one story that my husband and I recently experienced. We gave to an organization that we'd never given to before. And so somebody from the organization called to find out, who are you? How did you find out about us? Why are you interested in us? And what was the spark, and what more information can I give you to make sure this was not a one-time thing, that we, keep you as a continuous donor now. And that, I don't know, it was about a 15-20 minute conversation. And guess what? We're going to keep giving to that organization. So those personal relationships and really treating donors, not just as a one-time giver or, a once a year giver, but as a relationship and as investors. They are investing in our organization. They're not getting a financial return. They're getting a psychic return, and they want to know that their investment is being well managed, and that they've made a good investment, that they should do it again. So to me, it's about the relationship. And I think, Carol, you said that already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another thing, I know this makes me feel good as a donor, when people at the organization know who I am. If I can think of organizations that have an advocacy arm to them, they know that I'm interested, and they bring me in for updates along with other donors. And people know what I'm interested in and make a point of trying to connect me with that. And I feel very welcomed by staff and volunteers in the agency. So I think an insider newsletter, or because they know you're particularly interested, are the kinds of things that a lot of people appreciate, that somebody knows they care about their organization.
So I see an idea in the chat that I want to steal. It says a thankathon with their board. So instead of the board members doing this on their own and on their own time, getting the trustees together. And I think that's a fabulous idea, because it creates a bonding opportunity for the trustees as well. That Leslie, awesome.
Yeah.
I did a thank-you-thon at a prior organization when I was a development director, and we would do it. I think we had the board come in around 5:30, fed them dinner, and they were able to go into different offices and use the phones or their cell phones. We had it scripted. We handed out a sheet of paper with some giving history. And occasionally a board member would, at the end of about an hour or so, would say, hey, I just got a donation from so-and-so after I thanked them. And, that would create some excitement. So we did it midweek dinner time because we knew people would be home.
Yeah, I think hopefully we're going to have a lot more opportunities now for getting people together again to do things like that. And actually, Jiva used to do that as well.
Yeah.
But it's been a few years even before the pandemic. But I think that group enthusiasm and bonding from an experience like that is great and motivational.
Yeah. And somebody else put in that they have board members do thank you calls or send handwritten notes.
Right. That's a great
Yeah.
alternative. Because these days, and this is one of the things we're struggling with at Jiva, I'm sure other organizations are too. I don't pick up the phone anymore if I don't recognize the number. Sometimes even if I do, but so you end up, as a trustee at Jiva, we end up making a lot of calls, just leaving messages, which it feels unfulfilling.
But I've been surprised at how many people actually have answered the phone. So it's not a huge percentage, but I want to also look in the chat at, you asked for what library did people go to as a child? And I think people love engagement and something like that. And then, what you do with that, you might be able to pick up stories for a e-letter or something of that sort. Again, that engagement factor is great, and relationship building.
And I think if you can pick up the phone and say hello at other times of the year. Somebody put in there doing something at Valentine's Day. It doesn't need to be end of the year. It could be Thanksgiving. It could be Mother's Day if you know that somebody might not be getting a Mother's Day call. I think that's a wonderful opportunity, or Father's Day, those kind of alternative holidays.
Right.
Yeah.
Looking at the Love Fest around Valentine's Day to thank donors, board, and partners.
Yes, these are all really great ideas.
Great ideas, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think it's important. Bleeding into how you celebrate success, because we're talking about the thank you calls. I as a trustee and as a donor, I do think it's important to separate out the thank you from another ask. That when you make a thank you call, it really should be just thanking them for their donation, not and will you give us more? And it's the same thing if you have an organization that's able to hold thank you events for your donors. Make sure it's really purely thank you, not hitting them up again for more, because that's the surest way to make sure they won't come.
I think we've covered this, but I just want to be sure that we've focused on the development committee's role in caring for the board members and others who do both volunteer recruitment and if you look at it as resource development, how are making sure you stay in touch with both your fundraisers and your outreach people of all kinds to make sure they're getting what they need to do their job and that they're getting thanked for what they do and appreciated for what they do. It is every committee's job to make sure that they're extending beyond just, oh, we've got to raise this money, to seeing how our volunteer fundraisers are feeling as part of that job of raising the money.
Right. And I think, that's an important point, Carol, that the development team really needs to think of us as their leverage, think of trustees as their leverage. And so they need to educate us enough and help us through that in order to leverage them so that they don't have to do everything. We can help them and have that additional impact. And then we can use our friends to do that too.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things the development committee can do is to be explicit about here's what we need, so that you're responding not to a general appeal for help and a general desire to help, but this is our plan, these are the components of it, this is what we need help with. And I think that's why a lot of people don't do something, is because it has not been made clear exactly what that looks like or how to plug in.
Hi, this is Jeff with Rochester Child First Network. Our development committee came up with a great idea we're going to use at our next board meeting, where each development committee member or two development committee members are going to lead these little breakout sessions. So it's going to be a development committee member and 4 other board members. And we put it so that, some newer board members are with newer board members and people who've been on the board for a long time. But anyways, we're going to have 4 little breakout sessions, and we're going to take about 10 minutes, and just the development committee will ask their fellow board members, who do you know at these various businesses, or which of these individuals do you know? You don't have to make an ask. You don't have to, we're not going to go back and say that Joe Smith referred us to it. Just a simple exercise, who do you know? But what I'm really excited about is the development committee came up with this themselves, and they want to get their fellow board members involved in identifying prospects, but in a real non-threatening way.
Yep, and from there grow big things.
Right. That's great. And it's also important. So one of the jobs I had before being chair of the board at JIVA is I was the chair of the development/advancement committee. And, if you've got a large board and everybody's on different committees, one of the things I made sure I did, and I know Laura Sadowski's on the call and she'll laugh, but at every board meeting, I made sure I reminded every trustee that they were all on the development committee, whether they came to our meetings or not. And it is important for every trustee to know that he or she is part of that development effort. It's not just those 5 trustees that signed up for that committee.
Yeah, and that's a really important point about boards and committees, that the whole board needs to know what their committee's jobs are. And every committee needs a job description. Every committee needs some outlining within that of what kinds of members you look for to be on that committee. But I think having a job description that makes clear that that we've been talking about for an hour is the development committee's job, to engage the whole board. There was one other thing that Maggie and I talked about, and that was about relationship building. And I think I heard this on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, which is the whole matter of relationships, which I think we've all agreed is where it's at in terms of development, that people who are concerned about asking needn't be concerned, because as you begin relationships, it would be like going on a first date and asking someone to marry you if you ask them for the gift when you first had this sit down with them. And that really, for me, painted the picture very clearly. This truly is about understanding what someone's interests are, what would fulfill them if they had an opportunity to do it through your organization, and that this is a longer term thing. This is not wham bam, thank you, ma'am.
Right, and so I'll add, we at GIVA, we recently did a search for our new artistic director, and one of the candidates said something that I wrote down because I thought it was perfect. And what the person said was, when we asked them, how are you at fundraising? And the answer was, I'm looking at my notes now. By the time you ask for money, if the person you're asking doesn't see it coming, you've done something wrong. And so I think that gets to, the prep and making trustees feel comfortable that this isn't a cold call. They're not going and asking for somebody for money out of the blue. These are people who are already engaged in the organization. There's already an interest. If you're at the point where you're asking them to consider a gift of $2,500, there's already the relationship there. It's not out of the blue. And
Right.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you even go so far as to say, I hope that you will become a donor to our organization, but I want you to fully understand what we do, what our goals are, so that at a point where we talk about that, you fully understand and have a basis for making a decision.
Thank you. I see that it's like 6 o'clock. I'm going to launch an evaluation poll, but people do not need to leave. We can stay on, Carol and Maggie. I don't know what your schedule is tonight. Or, I'm sorry we didn't pour that glass of wine earlier, Maggie.
I'm happy to stay on if people have some questions or people want to just share other experiences of their own.
I'm happy to stay on as well.
Yeah, and we'll just pretend we have a beer or a glass of wine. So do you want to open it up to allowing people?
Sure.
Everyone can unmute themselves.
And do you want to go back to the screen where we see people in the gallery rather than just Carol and me? I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, here, we'll remove the spotlights. Yeah. Spotlights are removed. Oh. You can go into gallery mode.
There we go.
Say hello to everybody. So I don't know if people even know each other on here. I've been around a long time and I don't know everybody. I'm Melinda Goldberg. My day job is that I'm the director of the Council of Agency Executives. I see John Williams. John, you're retired, but I'm going to guess you're still on a couple of boards. You're muted.
He's on Jiva's board.
I'm on GIVA board, and I am the co-chair of the LGBT plus Giving Circle at the Community Foundation.
Oh, great. Glad you could join us. Christine, hi. Where are you on development staff?
I'm the events director for the Al Siegel Foundation.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And Sydney, where are you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm with Kathy at the American Legion Auxiliary Foundation. So Kathy as our board president actually this year. So.
Well, that's nice that you could both attend this together.
Yeah, it was really great. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Hi, Elizabeth and Coswave.
So before everybody hops off, does anyone else have any gems that they want to share with the group that we weren't able to cover? They're dropping like flies. It's drinking time.
Oh, my gem is if you haven't been to St. Joseph's for the breakfast, go for the food, go for the fellowship, go for the amazing work they do.
I can definitely attest to that.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and giving their time this afternoon. And I hope it's been a little helpful.
And thanks for your participation and good examples.
Yeah. So, Kathy, you had asked about Carol's. You had a video link I don't know if you're able to put that. in
Carol
the-
mentioned a 5-minute video that she would send us later, and I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that it doesn't drop off her to-do list.
Right, yeah, it actually, it's Propel volunteer responsibilities. I think if you put that in, but I will send it. Melinda, why don't I send it to you and?
Yeah, and Aisha will send that out to
Aisha.
everybody.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Trying to see what's in the chat. Thank yous, great programs. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You got a lot of thank yous, Maggie and Carol. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for inviting us to do this.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
this was
it was our
a lot of fun. I think we should do it again like this.
Yes.
Works for me.
Okay.
great. Thanks for being my partner, Maggie.
Thank you, Carol. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye. Good night.
All right.